Hello, everyone. I see a bunch of folks joining. I know you guys just came over here from the keynote, so we're going to give folks a minute to jump into their breakout rooms, and we'll be starting shortly. Okay, it looks like we're reaching kind of a steady amount of folks in the room. So I think we'll go ahead and get started and let other folks join as they're able, since we just have about 45 minutes. So I want to dive right in and welcome you all to this breakout session entitled Ensuring Equitable Access and Success for All. My name is Rachel Hirsch. I'm a senior policy analyst at the National Governors Association Center for Best Practices, and I'll just be moderating this session with our three experts that you see on the screen here. I want to remind you guys that I'll be, giving them a couple questions to start us off, but we want to save time for a question and answer. So as they're speaking, if you have a question that comes to mind, please feel free to enter it in the chat or in the Q&A box. I'll be monitoring both and making sure we have time to get to those. So again, for the folks who just joined, you're in the Ensuring Equitable Access and Success for All session. I hope I don't need to give too much of an introduction as to why this is important, but as we all know, our workforce and education system as it is serves some well and some not as well. And we need to be creating strategies that are fit for specific populations who might need more support or just different support than what you think your traditional student might be able to get access to these great jobs in which they are then wonderful employees, as we know. So we have three folks with us today who work with different groups of people, and they are going to be talking about, some innovative programs, some successful strategies they've been trying, and also about what some challenges have been, and how you guys in the audience can help to advance this work. So I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves with their name, title, and organization, and just a little bit about what's the average type of person they're working with, what's the specific populations they're kind of targeting to make sure that these folks get into good paying jobs. So I'm going to start with Brian Walsh.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Brian Walsh. I'm a program manager at the Vera Institute of Justice. I work on the Unlocking Potential team, which means that our team works on expanding higher education in prison programs. I started working in higher education in prison as a corrections education director for Peninsula College. That was in 2008. And in Washington State, where I live and still work remotely for Vera, community colleges provide the full range of adult education, vocational training, and degrees in the prison system for the Washington State Department of Corrections. So I started working there and then moved to the State Board for Community and Technical Colleges, where I oversaw the contract between the community college system and corrections. So now at Vera, I work on a very similar world, but with all 50 states. Our team helps colleges and corrections come together to figure out how do we help create pathways for people from the lowest levels of ABE into college level instruction, into degrees and continuing education and careers when they get out.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Julia.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Trujillo Luengo, and I work for the city of Portland, Maine. I run the Office of Economic Opportunity within our Economic Development Department. We primarily serve Portland's racial, ethnic, and linguistic minorities, even though we try to identify populations who have persistent barriers to employment and access to resources. Before I came to the city of Portland, I worked at the state level, running the state's multicultural affairs office. And before that, I ran the migrant education program, which exposed me to the farm working and the migrant world that I did not know existed in the shadows of Maine. So I have a wide experience working with Native populations and racial and linguistic and ethnic populations overall. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thanks for being here, Julia. Walter.
Well, good morning, and thank you for having me. My name is Walter Simmons. I'm the president and CEO of Employ Prince George's in Prince George's County, Maryland. And I also serve as the Prince George's County Workforce Development Board Director, providing services to our public workforce system. We serve over 30,000 job seekers and businesses a year. And Employ Prince George's as a workforce development entity, we have a number of different programs that serve everybody, but we have identified and created demographic specific programs for returning citizens, veterans, workers who are 55 plus, immigrants, refugees, asylees, English language learners, those impacted by COVID-19, and as well as our disconnected youth. So we are really looking forward to talk with you all today about how we've created a system to address the barriers of specific populations and still incorporate them into our overall local system. Thank you, Rachel.
Awesome. Thanks, Walter. So you guys have heard we have folks working across the country in very different, regional contexts, and also working with everyone from returning citizens, justice involved folks, veterans, out of school youth, ethnic and linguistic minorities, a whole bunch. And, by no means is one strategy the right fit for all these folks, but we're going to try and cover as many innovative and promising strategies as we can in this time, and also try to bring out some common themes that no matter who you're working with, you might be able to apply to your work. So Walter, I'm going to actually start with you now. You just talked about some practices that you are implementing at the systems level that are leading to success with some of these folks with barriers. Can you share some examples of that?
Well, I think, Rachel, as a workforce board director, I think we sometimes see ourselves as managing the workforce system. But I think even from a government standpoint, that's really the issue with our workforce system, is thinking that there's one system. What I believe is that there's a public workforce system of government-funded workforce development programs. There's a nonprofit workforce system that's using non-government resources that's not accessing government dollars. And there's also a private sector workforce system that is, executing workforce development programs because they aren't able to receive the people or services that they need, and they've now started funding it on their own. As a government workforce development system, we've tried to blend and create a local workforce system that brought all of those partners together so that we can provide holistic support on people throughout their journey. So we actually changed our workforce system into a free membership network that brings together government, community-based organizations, private sector, and the nonprofit community. And what we've been able to do is identify these populations that have what we call significant barriers to employment, and been able to cluster the different organizations that have specific services or expertise and put those clusters together to really create holistic services. So in our job center, from a systems level, and the second largest, we're a predominantly African-American community, but the second largest population is the Hispanic community, and they really lack services. So, we started putting together a refugee resettlement agency, a civil legal services, pro bono civil legal services organization, along with our workforce development services and social services. And we called the program Career Pathways for All. So that's what I mean from a systems approach. Is one entity can't do it all. If we were working with Brian, we have a reentry program. We have our health department for substance abuse, mental health needs. We have a program through the local college, public college system, doing family reunification, but we're also doing expungements. So at a systems level, what I'm trying to do is identify all of the different organizations that have expertise and create a system where we can cluster them together to best fit the needs of those populations and to deliver the maximum outcome.
Thanks, Walter. Yes, a theme of this symposium is collaboration. So that's really great to hear how you're thinking about putting groups together intentionally to further and improve this work. Julia, I'm going to go to you. What have you seen that's been working in Portland?
I think in addition to what Walter has mentioned, I think something that we've been doing for some time is incorporating the employer voice into everything that we do so that we're all on the same page. Sometimes service providers, government agencies, even philanthropy, they're not really have the same goals. They may have the same goals in mind, but the expectations are a little bit different. So we've really been trying to braid that in. And that has resulted in several partnerships, particularly for our linguistically diverse populations, where we've braided WIOA money, private dollars, local government dollars, to support cohorts of folks to work on specific industries, from the finance industry and banking to healthcare to other areas. So I think that's something that I've noticed is being piloted in many areas around the country for different populations. Something that we've also, we actually borrowed the idea from Canada, is a professional connections program. That's something that we ran here in the city. Essentially, we match internationally trained professionals with local based professionals over a cup of coffee. And then the local based professionals have to connect this newcomer to our city, or somebody who's been underemployed for decades and is not well connected to the industry, to another 4 connections. So the idea is that when people used to come to all of us service providers, job case managers, etc., we're not an expert in biochemistry, but you can talk directly to somebody who is as passionate as you in biochemistry and can connect you to the industry right here at the local level. That has proven to be really successful. And again, it's not an idea that we invented, but that we've adopted and made it Portland based. So I think that's easily transferable across the country as well.
Very cool. And yes, at the Center for Best Practices, we are all for finding things that work elsewhere and adapting them to your personal context. So that's great. Brian, what are you seeing from your perspective with folks, reentry and justice involved folks?
So we're seeing sort of 3 different trends. So one is with the FAFSA Simplification Act, Pell became available, will be available starting July 2023. And since 2016, there's been a experimental sites initiative through the U.S. Department of Education, where a select group of colleges, 130 of them right now, can offer Pell to incarcerated students in prisons. And I think what we're seeing there is that that initiative brought, 130 colleges, many of which had not been doing this before, in prisons to serve a population that has been underserved since Pell was banned from the use in prison in 1994. Part of what's happened there is that colleges, they may have been providing adult basic education in prisons, or corrections often is the WIOA Title II provider. And so as soon as you start to bring in college programs into the prisons, you start to build that pathway for students so that to the student, it's no longer that I'm going to get a GED and now I'm done with education in prison. Now I can get a GED and there's another step. And what we're seeing that's really interesting is how colleges are developing systems with their corrections partners so that students have some choices. And they have a choice of workforce programs, they have a choice of academic programs, just like we see in the community. So I think that initiative to use federal funding for financial aid to bring colleges in has it's increased it to now we have tens of thousands of students participating in education that were not there before. And what that means, though, is then colleges have to get really good at providing reentry services. And so there's an example at Metropolitan Community College in Nebraska, in Omaha. They have, frankly, just a beautiful reentry center right in the middle of campus. It's right next to student services. It's the old library. It's this nice beautiful brick building. It says reentry services. Nobody's hiding it down in the basement that people are coming back to campus from prison. They're really intentionally trying to re-engage with people as they release from the criminal justice system. And those students are then directly connected with, if they need to go into ABE, they're connected to ABE. If they're going on to complete a workforce degree, they're supported in that. And they're providing these wraparound services to do that. So I think it's the real innovative idea there is that colleges have a role in reentry, that it's not just for the nonprofit world or corrections to take care of. And the third, as Walter mentioned, workforce boards are doing some really interesting work when it comes to reentry. So in Wisconsin, the South Central Workforce Development Board partners with the Department of Corrections and provides reentry services, provides America's Job Centers right in the facilities, which completely changes that idea that, a person's in prison, they need to find a job as soon as possible, and so that they have to wait until they get out to find that job. Now they can start looking for work months ahead of time, and they have all the supports, the workforce board, to do that. So I think those three different examples of partnerships are really great innovations that are happening right now.
Awesome, Brian, thank you. And if you guys see questions in the chat that you want to quickly respond to, feel free, although I will be getting to those during the Q&A portion. So Brian, everyone touched on the importance of partnerships, but I want to dig a little deeper. We talked about, partnerships with workforce boards, colleges, nonprofits. What are some best practices in partnering, and/or what are some partnerships that are maybe thinking a little bit outside of the box that you all have found important in your work? And I'll just open this up to anyone who has a response.
Well, I'll dive in really quickly. So there's sort of two important partnerships that we've seen that have worked really well. So one is that colleges and corrections coming together to form consortia, and that those consortia involve real formal structure. So it's not just an informal, we're going to meet once a month. It's that there's a strategic plan for the state. Kansas has been really good at this, where they have a consortium of higher education. New York has had one for decades. So those consortia that where colleges can be thinking about, what is it the students are needing. Corrections can be helping to implement and break down those barriers. Those kinds of partnerships are really important. The other one is ensuring that formerly incarcerated people and people who are currently incarcerated have a voice. I would say that this is kind of goes to the question about what's missing, but it's also really important to enable this work, is to make sure that the work is not being done without the voice of the people it's being done for. And so in some examples, we're starting to see corrections even bring on directors at the senior level within corrections who have experience with the criminal justice system, having been in prison. We're seeing colleges create student voice councils that are like extensions of the associated student body, and really trying to give students in prison a voice and opportunities for leadership and to help design the program.
Awesome, Brian. Yeah, I don't think the importance of actually getting feedback and buy-in and from people you're actually affecting. We can't overstate the importance of that. Julia, I saw you're about to unmute, and I was going to ask about, you're working with a lot of communities that might otherwise be, if they're don't speak English fully yet, they might be isolated from your usual work. How do you partner with folks and organizations to really make sure you're accessing them and being able to serve them?
Yeah, so I think I can speak a little bit of that, and also I saw a question in the Q&A as well that maybe I can right into this response that asks about undocumented workers and how we can engage that very vulnerable population as well. So a partnership that has been successful in Portland is that we in local government, we have a structure that allows us to collect, it's called tax increment funding under the development of the city. So there's a clause in the law that allows us to use tax increment funding, TIF dollars, toward workforce training. This is a very unusual funding source and very flexible in comparison to other federal or state sources. So we entertained it specifically to support individuals who do not and are not eligible to be supported through state and federal funding. So that now we have trainings where with a very wide variety of statuses that everyone can access an ELL to CNA program or an intensive English program. And then I would say that all of the providers, both from our WIO providers, our community college system, we have formed a coalition called the Greater Portland Workforce Initiative. And we've been meeting for about 14 years. And it probably took us about 6 to 7 to create a common data collection form that we all use so that then we can create this programming and we have a better understanding on who's in the middle. So in those types of forms, we're very intentional about looking to see who is missing in these types of trainings that have persistent barriers to employment. And then we intentionally go there and try to develop programming for those who are not accessing our system. So we ask those questions through data.
Great. And then last question for Walter on the partnerships. You mentioned these clusters that you've kind of put together of folks working on, similar issues that need to be around the table. Can you talk a little bit more to Brian's point about like formal structures for partnership? How are those structured and how do you make sure that people are continuing to work together through those?
One, I like to develop partnerships before a grant. One, you get 6, 8 weeks, 12 weeks to submit a grant. It's hard to do anything meaningful in that standpoint if you're starting a partnership from that point. So we develop partnerships based on you do this well, I do this well. But also even as we're facilitating partnerships, because I believe if we can create a partnership where there's no additional funding, when funding comes, it makes it that much easier. 2, every partnership that we develop, I think we have 10 MOU templates. So we utilize a template for everything, just so we can institutionalize it. In our industry, people come and go, and you lose that institutional knowledge. So you want to memorialize whatever this agreement is amongst those. 3, what is the definition of a partnership? The exchange, one person gets something. I always like to ask, I always ask people to be selfish in our meetings. What do you want? I mean, we're not in the industries that we're in. We're normally good people. It's like, oh, we want to be nice. But no, now's the time for you to be selfish. Because if Julia doesn't tell me what she needs, I can't help her, right? I can't ensure. And then there's a miscommunication from the very start. And then there's a trickle effect on the long-term relationship and outcomes from that. So I really look at those MOUs, and when there's not an exchange of goods, if you have to go through a legal department or a general counsel, where you work with a government entity, sometimes it makes it a lot easier. And then also in grant applications, you have that demonstrated experience or history of a partnership. 2, when establishing like a membership network, we actually created a general membership network form that identifies what type of member are you, and created a tiered approach where you can engage people that you're going to be working with and referring customers and people onto a partnership where somebody's just accessing your information, but they want to be involved. So you really have to look at all your stakeholders and what is the level of engagement with everybody you're partnering with, and should you have the same MOU? Those are areas that I tend to look at as well as I'm formalizing partnerships. And really, I think that's a great question. There's too many partnerships that are developed that are informal, that are based on a staffing relationship. And if we're building successful systems, they can't be based on individual relationships and people. We have to build institutional relationships that are written, confirmed, so that they have longstanding, they're long lasting and sustainable. but also we have the outcomes, because every time a relationship falters, that's a person that doesn't receive services. And what might not be mission critical to us is mission critical to the people who are walking through our door.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thinking about that sustainability beyond just personal relationships, funding, et cetera. Those were all great points. I saw a question in the chat that I think I'm going to go to, and feel free to enter your questions, folks, as you have them. While I still have some of my own, I do want to make sure we're answering questions from the audience. So we had a question that was essentially, a lot of funding models are based off of outcomes. And obviously it's, potentially easier to get good outcomes if you're already starting with folks that don't need as much assistance to get to the end point. So how can providers afford to support those who need it most? Yeah, go ahead, Walter.
I'd love to jump in on this. One of the things that I believe that we have struggled on is funding diversification amongst organizations. Too many times we get locked into what are the traditional funding for my organization or my program. We go to conferences, we all go to the same conference, same year, same speakers, same, constant contact email. We really have to break out of that. So, and like Employer Prince George's, we have 24 funding streams. Every year we're consistently identifying new funding streams. But you'd be, what I see from, especially on workforce development boards, which the comment mentioned WIOA and performance, 100% correct. But are you tapping into all of the relative funding streams? I don't think there's any organization that's tapped into 100% of the eligible funding streams. Are you tapped into community development block grant? There's community block grant employment. There's community development block grant, natural disaster. If you're in an area of wildfires, tornadoes, hurricanes. Are you tapped into local management board funding, governor's office of child and family affairs? In reentry, there's a lot of money coming through crime prevention, sentencing aversion. And so I really believe, Rachel, and to whoever asked that question, we really need to look at braided funding streams. If people don't know what that is, we can mention that. But a braided funding, diversification of your funding stream, and what is your organization's or program's business plan? And then how does your fundraising plan align with that business plan? And if you don't have an organizational business plan, you got to start developing those. So braided funding, organizational develop or programmatic business plan, and then a fundraising plan that includes the braided funding model and the business plan model is ways that I think we can really start leveraging funding and identifying a diversified funding. And lastly, CSR, corporate social responsibility, having the private sector invest. That's why I mentioned public sector workforce system, nonprofit workforce system, private sector workforce system. How do you blend those to your benefit? How do we leverage the requirements of corporate social responsibility requirements to invest in the programming and efforts that we're doing?
Awesome. Thanks, Walter. Julio or Brian, any thoughts on that question about kind of the inclination, fighting the inclination some providers might feel to work with some of the folks that might be the hardest to help?
So in corrections, one of the challenges that traditionally corrections agencies have paid for everything. So they may use WIOA Title II dollars to supplement their basic skills instruction. They almost never use Title I, WIOA Title I. They may use some of Title I of the elementary and secondary school funding. But what we're seeing is that some corrections agencies with their college partners are now rethinking who pays for what. And so as Pell is coming in, and Pell can be used to pay for college level work or vocational programming that corrections used to pay for, now corrections is thinking we can reinvest our money into the services for, as this question asks, for people who need more time, who need more services. So an example, going back to Kansas and Washington State, is that both states are looking at how to use corrections dollars to pay for reentry services, sorry, not reentry services, educational navigators who can sit down with students and really help them do the kinds of planning that you really need especially if you're looking at a longer sentence and thinking about where do you need to be, how do you get to the right program at the right time during your incarceration. And those are services that colleges aren't particularly skilled at because they don't necessarily know how that system works, but that corrections can be good at. And so then students are able to get the kinds of services that they weren't able to get in the past because now corrections isn't paying for everything. So we kind of think of it as like a lift and shift sort of model. Like you're, as Walter said, you're going to pay for this, what you can pay for, and we're going to pay for this. And I think that's been a real change for them. And it's a change in thinking for a lot of corrections agencies. And it goes back to the idea of partnerships, that colleges understanding what they can do. The other place that I think is interesting is seeing more and more colleges think about Perkins and non-traditional funding with Perkins. Some of the interesting things there is that you have programs within prisons that we divide up all of our prisons by assigned sex. And so you have male prisons who are doing accounting programs, which is technically a non-traditional program for Perkins. And you're suddenly seeing colleges think, hey, we can actually be doing some really interesting work within the Perkins funding model as well.
And I guess the only thing that I would add, I think definitely the braiding of funding and just trying to diversify as much as you can gives you that room, because I think we're all identifying that can be a huge barrier in itself for us to serve the people who need it most. And I think there's also an opportunity to re-educate. I think for the last 10 years or something like that, we've been so result oriented, almost myopic in our quantitative way of running the world that we totally dismiss qualitative and everything else. So I think there's an opportunity to incorporate other indicators if you have the ability to braid your funding with other funding sources, to also show ways that you are tracking progress or results that are not in number of jobs attained and retention after 90 days and all those things that we're so used to. So we've tried to do that in professional connections. Something that for us, for example, it's a great value is that we ask every connectee that enrolls, what part of the system have you visited prior? So we can see, okay, they went to our WIOA provider, they did this, they did that. So it gives us a sense of, okay, as a result of our intervention, now they're connected to all these many partners because they came to professional connection. So that's a way that for us is success that is not really translated into finding a job necessarily, but we consider that success as well. So it's a mind shift as well.
For sure. And that kind of leads into one of my final questions, which is, we've talked a lot about what's been working, some innovative ideas. What's missing? What do you hope the future looks like for your various programs and the folks you work with? And how do we get there, especially thinking of the audience that we have here, which is employers, adult basic ed providers, folks like that. How can they be working with you guys to further this work?
Well, I'll say, I think one of the things our systems need to work on is the data entry and case management, the systems we're using. I think one of the big things is, one, how do we include artificial intelligence and to expand our capacity? It's something to move everything onto a website, but we need our websites to be more intuitive. We also need to be able to profile people for systems change. When people give us our profile information and we start seeing the same common profile, what are the continuum of services that are needed to make that difference? And when we have a group of people that all have the same profile, that go through the same services and have that success, how do we document that and repeat it? Right now, I feel like we've just been waiting for these studies to come out from think tanks or research institutions, but we are the holders of the data. How can we utilize that data to our benefit? And then utilize an artificial intelligence to be intuitive, to answer questions, to expand our capacity when a physical person is around. And then where does that data go and can we share? Can we share it with the community college, the jail, our libraries? I'd love that a library could refer somebody to me without having to physically have them to get a bus pass over to me, because that might be their last dollar, their last $5. What if they could send their, and not having people bring the same documentation? So, having some systems alignment and then make these systems being more intuitive, I think is the future. And I think the future is now. That's one of the positives of COVID. And I think we can figure it out.
Awesome. Julia.
I think I will add to something that Brian mentioned earlier. I think this intentional integration across systems like the educational navigator, having navigators in an employer setting that help navigate all the resources that exist within the workforce development system, because employers are not really equipped, or not yet. I mean, here they're starting to learn that they're going to have to play a little bit more actively in order for them to hire and retain. But I think these crossovers, these bridges are very important, and something that we have not done in the past, but it seems to be more common these days.
One of the biggest challenges within corrections is that it is its own world separate from our communities. And one of the most powerful things that I learned in this work is when somebody told me that for their family members and community members, the people in prison are still in their community. They're just not able to be in their community. Like they're still part of it. They're removed from it. And so part of the challenge is that what we've learned in COVID is that we can use technology to try to keep these connections going. And in corrections, they had to start to learn the exact same thing, but it's by no means really at the level that it needs to be. So what's really needs to happen is employers, educators, corrections, security, and communities have to kind of come together to figure out how do we keep people engaged with the community while they are in prison. Some examples. So Julia, in Maine, the University of Maine at Augusta and Washington Community or College, I can't remember quite, Mount Washington Community College and the Department of Corrections have brought in Zoom classes, have brought in and have allowed students to access the internet in a secure way so that people can actually do their job search. They can apply for financial aid, they can enroll in college, they can take courses online, they can connect with family and friends in a way that's no longer as isolating as it was. But those are really exceptions to the norm. Some states are still, these barriers are still very much in place and are not going away very soon. So I think one of the things that has to happen is for employers to say, and for stakeholders in the community to say, hey, if we're really going to be successful for people to return to our communities and be ready to reintegrate, we need to be doing this as early in a person's time that they're in prison as possible. People like to say that reentry begins in day one at the reception center, but that isn't really the case if you're not able to maintain those connections to the community. And we really need to get better at using technology to help make that possible.
Very much so. And I think the question I'll really end with, recognizing that we have 6 minutes and I know the next session starts right after this. So, but a big focus of this symposium is on employer and industry's role. And we're obviously in a time right now where employers are saying they need more people, they can't fill jobs. What's their role in kind of meeting halfway and investing also in this work?
I can go first then, or go ahead, Julia.
Go ahead.
So I think what part of this is on corrections and colleges have to get really good at inviting employers into the prison world, but there are huge opportunities for customized training, for employers to understand the risk of hiring somebody, or the reduced risk of hiring somebody with criminal history. That there's part of the work is on us as the community to help educate employers, but then part of it is also to think about ways that employers can be engaged in the training. And we have some really interesting programs that are happening that are strongly employer-led. Things in wind turbine energy that employers are helping to guide that training within the prison so that people get good jobs when they get out. And I would say the last thing is for employers to do is to sign on to the Second Chance Pledge that companies like JP Morgan have been leading. That's a really important way for employers to say that they're willing to give people a second chance, because that's what we need. If we're going to get people to get good jobs, we have to give them that chance. And we've seen some very large employers sign on to that. And now it's time to get that medium and small employer to also join in on that.
I think like just jumping on what I said earlier, I think employers, at least here in Maine in the past, have been sort of removed from, all organizations and agencies have been working and have employer outreach, case managers, et cetera, but we have not been in the same room trying to solve similar problems. And I think now that's beginning to change. And I think our biggest employer here in Maine piloted a workforce navigator at the entry-level positions to help them navigate internally and externally to the resources that exist. I think that's a model that is going to continue to grow here, and I think it has great potential in other areas of the country.
Very cool. Walter, yeah, final thoughts.
We've started really engaging businesses. What are your needs? Are you not meeting them? How can we meet them? Is this a benefit to you, and can you make an investment? Make it a direct investment. Tanger Outlets, MGM, CVS, Comcast, Verizon have all made those investments. We just opened a job center on October 19th. That's actually inside of a Tanger Outlet suite. And I'm sure we all are in close proximity to some kind of premier outlet. So it's like, hey, you need workers, you got 100 stores inside of here. Let me use a suite that's currently using for storage. So I think we really just need to engage. And one of the things I say that is because when I asked the CEO of Tanger, what did he think about doing this across the country? He told me something that really shocked me. He said, Walter, you're the only person to ever ask. I think they have 38 sites throughout the country. He said, yeah, we've never had a nonprofit or someone ask us for a suite. So I think we got to just start asking. That shocked me that a CEO said nobody ever asked. I think we need to start asking those questions that we think are going to be no's, because they could be no's, but on the opposite end, it could be a yes.
Well, I think that's a great last lesson to end on, is to ask and to listen, whether that's employers, partners in your community, or the folks that you're actually serving, and to integrate those thoughts into your programming and your policies. So I'm going to give folks 2 minutes before their next session. Your next session starts at noon. Back on the webpage, you can find the links. Thank you so much, Brian, Julia, and Walter, for your insight. And thank you all for joining us, and enjoy the rest of the symposium.
Thank you. Be well.